Bienvenida para hablar de todo esto a nuestro invitado internacional, como todos los jueves por la noche, Jay Keppel, Senior Research Analyst at sentimenttrader.com. How are you, Jay? Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me on.
It's always a pleasure. Let's start by talking about the indexes. I think we have a pretty interesting chart. We saw it last week also. Comparing the different indexes, we have technology leading this rally, even with Nvidia yesterday and today, rising more than 20%. And we're having a lot of technology names rising very, very fast, but Dow Jones is pretty much quiet right now, and Russell 2000 is still lagging, right?
Yeah, I think we're a little bit at a crossroads here in the stock market. The first chart that I have is actually four charts. It's the four major indexes here in the U.S. And as you pointed out, in some ways it's looking good, in some ways it's not. The two on the right, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq 100, really what you want to see with any of these indexes, or all of them preferably, is for that index to be above its 200-day moving average, and for that 200-day moving average to be rising. That's the definition of a bull market. Right now we don't have that. The S&P and the Nasdaq on the right, as you can see, are doing just fine. However, they are both kind of bumping their heads against resistance. The S&P has not been able to get through 4,200, and as we saw in the gold market recently, the more times that a market or an index kind of bumps its head against resistance and can't break through, the larger the threat of a breakdown. So you need to see those get through pretty soon. And the other two on the left, the Dow Industrials, is really in no trend at all, and the small cap, as you mentioned, is actually in a downtrend. So I think what this says is investors need to be paying close attention, and if things resolve to the upside, we need to get bullish very quickly, because I think it could run. But if these indexes can't get through and they start to break down, I think we'll need to play some defense very quickly.
Yes, Jay, very interesting. And 3 days ago, we saw a very big reversal on the Russell 2000 that tried to break out from that period of no movement, and we saw a big reversal. So it's very interesting. Right now, we are in a crossroad, as you said. We need to watch for that technological companies leading, while the rest is doing very bad. And talking about the sentiment also, Jay, because during the last weeks, we saw a lot of investors that were quite pessimist, and that also gives some gives some fuel to the rally. And right now we are seeing more investors getting more optimistic and with this rally, right?
Well, that's what it looks like to me. The second chart that I have, something called the panic euphoria model, and the top chart is the S&P 500 index, and the middle line is the 20-week moving average of that indicator. And it's real simple. Human nature never changes. Fear and greed are a constant, and when the market is doing well, that line rises, people get more bullish, and when the market goes down, people get more bearish, and that indicator declines. What we're doing with this 20-week moving average is, instead of trying to pick a bottom, we're really looking for a case where sentiment has kind of been washed out. People have gotten overly bearish and are now starting to swing back to the bullish side. So those red dots mark, since the mid-90s, all the times when this indicator has crossed back above the zero line. And in each case, each previous case, the S&P 500 index has been higher 12 months later, with an average gain of over 16%. So if we look at the far right-hand side, we just got a signal recently. So the good news is, if history proves to be an accurate guide, we should see the market resolve to the upside in the months ahead. The bad news is it's just one indicator, and there are never any guarantees in the stock market.
And also the bad news, Jay, is that between now and 12 months later, maybe we have some movements, right?
Absolutely.
Also talking about the real estate sector, we have a pretty interesting chart that you bring. Normally the sector is quite beaten down and loved right now. What do you think? It's time to watch this sector right now?
Well, yeah, it's time to watch. It's not necessarily time to jump in, but one thing I noticed recently is that among money managers, real estate is heavily underweighted. They've just basically thrown in the towel and dumped their shares and gotten out of real estate. And there's some fundamental reasons for that. Here in the U.S., the single family home market is declining right now. Commercial real estate, there's a lot of empty buildings and things. So there's some concerns, but basically when everybody just throws away a sector, so to speak, that's usually the time to start watching it. And the third chart that I have is the annual seasonal trend for the real estate sector. In other words, if we took the last 20 or 30 years of performance for this sector, what we find is that we've just entered what is typically, not always, but typically a very favorable time of year for this sector. So the reason I'm watching it is this. Seasonality, the way I use it is if a chart is saying that this sector or this index should be doing well, and that sector actually does start to perform, that's a very powerful time to be getting in. So I'm keeping a close eye, and if it can bounce, the real estate sector made a bottom in March, and then it rallied, and now it's coming back down. It looks like it's going to maybe retest that bottom, but if it's successful and does not break down further, I would not be surprised to see this sector surprise a lot of people in the months ahead, sometime between now and, say, mid-September.
Very interesting, Jay. We'll keep an eye also on the real estate sector. And finally, talking about bonds, we talked the last week about the seasonality of bonds, of TLT. Right now, we have another indicator. You bring the inverse bond model with sentimenttrader.com. What it shows us, Jay?
Yeah, so kind of the opposite of the real estate sector, even though they're both down, bonds and the real estate sector, money managers are heavily overweight in bonds right now. So they're definitely looking for a bounce. I'm all for that. The problem that I have is the indicator on top. To make it simple, it's just basically a combination of indexes and things that tend to rise when bond prices fall. So when you see that top index rising, specifically if the 5-week moving average is above the 30-week moving average, I call that bearish, and you can kind of see it in this chart. And at the moment, that top index is rising very strongly. So even though bonds are trying to put in a double bottom here, we're going to have to watch very closely. I'm not a fan of the long-term treasuries at the moment, and they do, if you look at the far right-hand side in the bottom chart, they do have a line of resistance that they need to get through. So I'm watching TLT. If it can get above that line of resistance, and especially if this indicator at the top begins to turn down, then I could get very bullish on bonds. But for now, just biding my time.
For now, we need to wait for confirmations. Jay Keppel, Senior Research Analyst at sentimenttrader.com. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have your analysis here at Negocios Televisión.
Thank you.
Despedimos ya a Jay Keppel. No se preocupen, sé que muchos no entienden el inglés. Aún así, vamos a explicar detalle a detalle lo que nos ha transmitido Jay Keppel, analista senior en sentimenttrader.com. Vamos a ver los 4 gráficos que nos ha compartido. El primer gráfico decía, un vistazo a los índices. Estamos en un punto crítico, en un crossroad, lo denominaba. Dice que, por ejemplo, los índices tecnológicos ya están empezando, siguen subiendo, lideran, es algo que ya viene comentando semanas, mientras que algunos índices se quedan atrás. Por ejemplo, el Russell 2000, el índice de las pequeñas y medianas compañías, fíjense que no termina de romper medias y todavía está en una tendencia a la baja. El Dow Jones, que sería el índice de las 30 compañías más grandes estadounidenses, que sería el de arriba a la izquierda, tampoco está rompiendo, sigue en una lateralización completamente dormido, sin mostrar ningún tipo de tendencia. Y por otro lado, el Nasdaq sí que está rompiendo al alza, está liderando, y el S&P 500 no logró romper esos 4.200, se mantuvo, rechazó ese primer intento de rotura y ahora a ver si consigue romperlo. Nos dice de vigilar esto porque a partir de aquí podríamos ver un cambio de tendencia si el S&P 500 no consigue romper y por supuesto el Russell tampoco lo hace. Si consiguen ambos romper, entonces será una confirmación muy alcista y una confirmación muy rápida, así que dice que vigilemos eso. Una vez rompan tenemos confirmación alcista, si no rompen, cuidado porque es confirmación bajista. Por otro lado, segundo gráfico, nos habla de un indicador de pánico y euforia. Dice que es un indicador que tienen en sentimenttrader.com y como ven acaba de cruzar un punto clave. Cada vez que ha cruzado este punto clave y el pesimismo se ha transformado en optimismo en el mercado, por así decirlo, el pesimismo ha hecho suelo, a partir de ahí normalmente dice Jay Keppel que todas las señales han coincidido con subidas en el mercado, así que un indicador bastante alcista, pero dice no deja de ser un solo indicador y hay que mirar varios. El tercer punto que nos comparte Jay Keppel, tercer gráfico, es sobre el sector inmobiliario, sobre el sector real estate. Tercer gráfico, vamos a ver esa estacionalidad que comparte del real estate y como pueden ver dice que entramos en unos meses que son estacionalmente muy positivos para este sector, que encima ha sido muy penalizado y que es muy odiado ahora mismo. Y por último nos habla de los bonos, cuarto gráfico, ¿cómo se comportan los bonos en este momento? Bueno, pues la semana pasada nos ha hablado de una estacionalidad positiva en estos meses, pero ahora nos dice que cuidado con el TLT porque un modelo que tienen ahí, un modelo que realizan con sentimenttrader.com les está indicando que todavía no es el momento de los bonos, que todavía tenemos que esperar a que el TLT rompa esa resistencia que tienen en la parte baja del gráfico y que el indicador se gire, el indicador de arriba se gire para demostrar que es el momento de entrar en bonos y que cuando así sea pues podremos ponernos muy alcistas. Por ahora simplemente toca esperar a medida que los intereses siguen rebotando, no terminan de bajar y los bonos pues por supuesto se quedan lateralizando y no terminan de romper la resistencia. Este ha sido el resumen de Jay Keppel en el día de hoy. Nos trasladamos ya directamente a nuestro siguiente invitado, a nuestro siguiente analista.